evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going over the history and geography of Mexico. We'll do geography first and then a brief overview of its history because Mexican history is very long and convoluted, so I'll wrap it up as best I can. And then we'll flip through this book and look at some fantastic pictures of Mexico. So let's first talk about the countries that Mexico borders. Mexico has this very long border up here with the United States. And you can always tell when you've got such straight angular lines like this that they're just circumstantial, they're just imaginary lines. But then you have borders like this, that's something natural. This would be the Rio Grande River. That makes up this whole part of the border over here. And then you can see some more circumstantial borders down here in the south with Guatemala. Of course, there's really nothing there. It's mostly forest, so just a technicality there to make some kind of border. Then this long, the Rio Usumacinta. Sorry, it's a long name. Kind of a theme in Mexico. Lots of long names. And Nahuatl is such a beautiful language, and I really need to look into see if there's Nahuatl ASMR, because my goodness, it's a tingly language. Surely someone out there has done Nahuatl ASMR. But anyway, Guatemala and the border with Belize up here. Very small border compared to its other borders. So geographically, let's start over here in this section known as Baja California. It is a very, very long peninsula, and it has this part bordering the Pacific Ocean, and this part borders the Gulf of California, which is actually a very aquatically diverse little corner of the ocean. You'll see lots of pictures in here. It's some really remarkable creatures that you can only really find here. And as you can tell, Baja California is very dry and very rocky and mountainous. And the more northern part of Mexico up here is part of the Sonoma Desert, which is mostly up here in California and Arizona in the United States, but is also here in Mexico. Most of the northern border of Mexico in general is pretty dry and arid and very desert-like. The imagery of like the cactuses and things like that, tumbleweeds, and Mexican desert is pretty iconic, honestly. Everyone can close their eyes and picture a Mexican desert, right? But as we go further south, we get some more mountains. There are two big mountain chains that dominate the eastern and western sections of Mexico. We can see the Sierra Madre Occidental and the Sierra Madre Oriental that just go right along the sides here. They're actually part of the Rocky Mountains going down here. And in the middle of it is this high plateau area. The northern part, like I said, is mostly dry and arid. But the further south you go, the more lush it gets. And the majority of people in Mexico live in that southern part of the plateau. You can see lots and lots of major cities over here. In particular, the capital, Mexico City. Along with, let's see, there's Guadalajara, there's Leon. We've got like Puebla. Lots, among many others, right? Plenty of cities. Big metropolitan area down here in that part of the plateau. But alongside these two mountain chains, we have the coastlines. And these two coastlines are very famous for their luxury vacation resorts and beautiful beaches. You can see this one bordering the Gulf of California and then onto the Pacific. You can see places like Puerto Vallarta and Acapulco down there. And then on this coast, it borders the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea, the Atlantic Ocean. There's plenty of spots along here. Veracruz is pretty important historically and also important for its oil import and exports. But the more famous resort areas you can see over here is Cancun, and right here is Isla Cozumel, another very famous vacation spot in Mexico. And these areas, of course, are much flatter, not mountainous whatsoever because they're beaches, right? So going back in here, we have these two mountain chains coming down to meet each other to this big mountainy section down here. And part of it, mainly this part over here, is known as the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt. Because, of course, Mexico lies along the Pacific Ring of Fire, we're going to have tectonic activity like earthquakes and volcanoes. There's quite a lot of active volcanoes in Mexico, but the most notorious one you can see right here, this is Popocatépetl. And it's really fun to say. I've probably butchered the name, honestly. And if I do butcher some names, please let me know in the comments how to correctly pronounce them. But it's a very large, very active volcano, and you can see right in the sites of some of the major city centers over here. So it's pretty well known. The biggest, however, is right around here, and it is Pico de Orizaba, and it's a stratovolcano. It's actually the highest peak in Mexico, and the third highest in North America. And it's an absolutely beautiful mountain. Oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure there's a picture in here. If not, go look it up later because it's very, very beautiful. And as we move further south, you can see a lot more mountain chains. Down here along the coastline area, we have the Sierra Madre del Sul. And then as we travel over here to the Isthmus de Tehuantepec, there's some Mexican music outside. I didn't add that. That was someone driving by. I live in a very predominantly Mexican neighborhood, so this is very exciting for me. Anyway, the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. We have the Chiapas mountain range down here, and like I said, the further south we go, the more hotter and humid and wetter it gets. And this is pretty much the wettest, most humid part of Mexico because it gets very jungly, rainforesty down here, but particularly up here on the Yucatan Peninsula, where you can see there's big swaths of land where there's no major cities or anything. And that's because it's all jungly, full of jaguars and parrots and all kinds of forest life. And we'll talk about that area in the history just a little bit. But something very interesting is up here is the Chicxulub crater. And right about here is believed where the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs landed. Boom, and all that. I think that's really interesting. I don't know why, but I think that's like a really cool fact that you should know before you fall asleep if you haven't fallen asleep yet. So in a nutshell, that's it for the geography of Mexico. Let's talk about its history, because the history of Mexico really begins down here in this area. So the earliest human artifacts found in Mexico were from about 10,000 years ago. Of course, not nearly as old as ones found in Africa and Asia and Europe, because humans had to travel down through Canada and down to here. And the earliest sort of farming villages were probably formed around 5000 BCE. And this area down here had lots of fertile soil to grow all kinds of different crops and create all kinds of different civilizations, almost far too many to mention, all with very unique attributes. But at one point, a lot of them kind of collided and formed some commonalities. But the earliest, most interesting one, I think, would be the Olmec, who are very famous for building these giant heads. Surely there's a picture in here of one of the heads. There goes some more music. And, oh my goodness, it's loud. I apologize. Maybe I'll have to cut this out if it's not too loud. But it kind of adds a little extra to the video, right? Anyway, like I said, I live in a predominantly Mexican neighborhood. Almost every Sunday night I get to hear mariachi live music. It's amazing. I love in the summer opening my window and hearing live music all through the night. I think it's fabulous. But anyway, on to the history. The Olmecs were famous for building these giant heads, and no one really knows why. No one knows who these people were, because each head is very different, very distinct. They're obviously modeled after someone, each single one. And yeah, that's pretty much all that we know about the Olmecs, to be honest. Just they left behind some big ol' heads. The most famous in Mexico's early history would have definitely been the Maya. We can see on this map has some of their ancient sites. The most famous in Mexico is definitely Chichen Itza. You can see is right here. But there's also Calakmul, among many, many others. The Zapotec people would have built, let's see, where did it go? It's down here somewhere. I saw it before I was filming. Monte Alban. It's right here. That very large city is built by them. There's also the ancient city of Cholula. And the most famous would be Teotihuacan, which was a huge city, giant pyramids, and very mysterious too. And these people, like I said, very different, but they wound up mishmashing. One of the things that they really had in common was the Nahuatl language. They were Nahua speaking people. But the glory days of these people really rose up in what's known as the Aztec Empire. They called themselves the Mexica, hence the name. But they built their huge city in what is now Mexico City. They called it Tenochtitlan, and it was massive. At its peak, it was larger than like London in the 1500s. It was incredible. I'm going to have actually 2 videos for you this week about the Aztec, so I won't go into too much detail about them now because I'm going to go way into detail about them later, and I'm so excited for it. It's so cool. But anyway, that's what you need to know. At this point in history, the Aztecs were the dominant ones. They had a triple alliance with 2 other massive tribes, and they were definitely a force to be reckoned with. They had a lot of enemies around the area. So in 1519, when Hernan Cortez landed in Veracruz and started to politically figure out everything, he allied with the Aztecs' enemies to defeat them in 1521 through a series of quick battles, I should say, because the Spaniards had guns and horses and the Aztecs did not. But also they introduced smallpox and measles to the area, and that wiped out a huge portion of the population. It's a very devastating takeover, actually, and Cortez pretty much wiped out all that was left of Tenochtitlan and built Mexico City right above it. And by 1535, the colony of New Spain was established, and it was pretty much, I believe, like most of what Mexico is today, along with a few others down here and a little bit more up here, but it would gradually expand over time due to the silver mines in the area. Mexico, it says this fact right here, is still the main producer of silver in the world, and the Spaniards got very, very wealthy off of it. And also Catholicism, of course, was introduced to the area, and once the ball got rolling on New Spain, Catholicism really took off in the area. I think I'll talk in this book about the Virgin of Guadalupe, a vision that was had of the Virgin Mary that, really sparked the Catholic, how do I say this, just like the enthusiasm for Catholicism, I should say. Mexican Catholics are a very unique kind of Catholics, very vibrant and enthusiastic, I should say. I guess that's how you describe them, but anyway. The colony was very prosperous, right? It was expanding, it was thriving, and it had a very large population of mestizos and criollos, which Criollos were people of Spanish descent who were born in Mexico, and the right? Did I get that backwards? No, I was right. And the mestizo were people who were of mixed heritage of native Mexicans and Spanish. Huge population, right? And the people who were actually born in Spain were the smallest population other than the African slaves that were also brought over. They're still an Afro-Mexican population today. But they were one of the smaller populations, but the most politically powerful. So that's not a good recipe, especially when things in Spain started to get pretty rocky in terms of, like, Napoleon invading, what have you. So on September 16th, 1810, a cry for independence was declared by a priest named Miguel Hidalgo, one of the big heroes of the revolution. And Mexico would fight against Spain for their independence from 1810 to 1821, where they were victorious. They became an independent nation. Independence was pretty rocky, though. I'm not going to get into all the details, but there were lots of coups and military takeovers and conquests of different areas, expanding their influence. It got pretty messy to the point where one of their big pieces of land, which is now Texas up here, decided to declare independence. They later decided to become part of the United States of America. That was pretty devastating for Mexico. Probably the most devastating. That was in 1824. In 1846 was the Mexican-American War, when, I believe I got this right, that Mexico was trying to negotiate with the United States about obtaining more land. The United States said no. The ball got rolling into a huge mess that turned into a massive war. If you know the term, like, remember the Alamo, that was when the Mexican soldiers attacked the Alamo Fortress in Texas. The United States invaded Mexico, ransacked Mexico City. It was pretty devastating. And the man behind it all in Mexico was named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. I had to say that very carefully because in my accent, in my California accent, we would say Santa Ana. So Santa Anna. I really have to enunciate that one. That led to a massive territory loss for Mexico, including where I'm currently filming this in California. Pretty much their whole big territories over here were taken by the United States, which was very unfortunate for Mexico because gold was discovered in California not long after that at all, like a couple years later. It was pretty messy. As time went on, the biggest mess was between the two major political parties, the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party. The Conservatives wanted some help. They asked France for help. France decided to invade and take over. In like the 1860s, they installed an Austrian emperor from the Habsburg family. That did not go well for him. He was executed. And the liberal opposition movement during this time, his name was Benito Juarez. And from what I've read, he's a very beloved presidential figure in Mexican history. But not long after that, in 1876, a man rose to power named Porfirio Diaz. And he was a very controlling president in terms of he spurred a lot of economic growth in Mexico. Lots of infrastructure, trains, roads, lots of industry being built. But it also created an even wider inequality gap between the rich and the poor. And that eventually led to the Mexican Revolution. And he was removed from power. And that was fought between 1910 and 1920. A very long, very devastating civil war in Mexico. Something like 900,000 people lost their lives during the revolution. It was a really, really rough one. But in the aftermath of that, a couple things happened that led to a period of pretty much stability for Mexico. One was that the oil industry really kicked off and generated a lot of wealth for Mexico. There was also a political party established known as the PRI, and at their start, because they were a combination of different political parties at their beginning, it was pretty smooth sailing. And it got to the point even where Mexico hosted the Olympics in 1968. There were, of course, little pockets of upsets and protests and really terrible things happening, but it was on a much smaller scale than what Mexico had seen before in its history. But the cracks started to show in the PRI during the 1980s when there were a lot of corruption scandals and election fraud and really terrible things like that. But in 2000, the first president that was not from the PRI was elected. His name was Vicente Fox. And after that happened, a lot of other political parties started to be created and have a more dominant presence. And I personally think that's a good thing, to have more than one political party like that, so you don't have two powers clashing or one power dominating, in my own opinion. But the two things that have really plagued Mexican history in more recent history, number one would definitely be the presence of drug cartels. It has created massive amounts of violence and displacement and murders and all of those horrible things, not to mention like the drug trafficking and gangs and what have you. Mexico's really tried to crack down on this, and it really hasn't been successful until about like maybe the last 5, 6, 7 years or so, where the violence is finally starting to kind of calm down a little bit and create a more peaceful country. The other would be the sort of political tensions with the United States. There's some more music for you. Of course, during all of this drug cartel horribleness, many people had to flee their homes and would go to the United States right up here because there's a lot of opportunities up there. And the mass immigration and at times illegal immigration was a lot for the United States. They tried to really crack down on the borders and created some really horrendous situations for the people who were trying to just have a better life for their families, deportations and detention centers and really terrible things. But that's still an ongoing thing, very sadly. But in a nutshell, that's where Mexico is today. Mexico is very, very strong economically. Daily life is on the up and up. It's doing incredibly well, and Mexico is an incredibly beautiful city. Mexico City is an incredibly beautiful city, but Mexico is also a very incredible country. So let me show you some pictures in this book. Here we go. There's some really awesome pictures like this one. That's a great one. Really good chapter. So this whole chapter has to do with the Day of the Dead, which when I talk about the enthusiasm of Mexican Catholics, this is mainly what I'm talking about. So this is how in Mexico they celebrate All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day on November 1st and 2nd. It's called Dia de los Muertos. And you can see lots of colors and flowers. In the other books I've covered for Central America, you see them visiting the graves of their loved ones, and it's very kind of solemn and respectful. Here it's more colorful and lively, and there's lots of different celebrations. You can see here all the candles. Some people, you can see they're all bundled up because they stay out there all night long and they cook food, their family's favorite foods, and just kind of have a little nice gathering. This is a really neat artwork by Diego Rivera. He's actually like right over here next to Frida Kahlo. But in the center we can see, La Calavera Catrina, who is this kind of skeletal woman figure. And over here we can see how a lot of women dress up as her and paint their faces as her, and it's really part of the pig traditions now. Here we can see a political map of Mexico. You can really see where the big city center is over here, along with many other cities over here. And really beautiful buildings and art pieces. That's really interesting. This is in Guanajuato. So, Mexican desert, right? Cactuses, rocks, and look at the beautiful water too, the Rocky Mountains in the background. Very beautiful desert. Here you can see a physical map of Mexico. You can see lots of the mountains I told you about. You can see there's Pico de Orizaba labeled there, along with all the different mountain chains and the plateau. And a lot of the rivers. I didn't really talk about the rivers, but many rivers throughout Mexico. Here's one of them. That's the Rio Grande, which in Mexico it's called the Rio Bravo del Norte. It's the Rio Grande in America. This is Lake Chapala. It's the largest lake in Mexico. Looks like they're trawling for some fish here. Or not trawling, what is the word? They're just fishing over here. Here are some pictures. This is Guadalajara. And up here, this is Puebla. Isn't that beautiful? Very, very colorful cities. And this is something I would never do. I'd be crying in there. I hate big heights like that, but it's a neat little view over this big canyon, so you can see all of the sights there. Here is Popocatépetl. Very beautiful volcano, very active. And some of the beautiful beaches in Mexico. Very, very nice. And let's see, this is in San Cristobal de las Casas. It's showing that it's a lot more humid and rainy down in the south. And this is, I believe it's Xochimilco. And it's one of the last remaining like Aztec built areas that the Spanish didn't destroy, because the Aztecs built a lot of islands in the rivers and the water there, and you can get on one of these boats and explore all the little man-made islands that the Aztecs created. Here's a very beautiful jaguar having a drink. We've got these big trees. These are boojum trees. I believe that's what they're called. That's what I've always called them, but they just are massive, big old cactus looking things. This is the dahlia, the national flower of Mexico. A very sweet little anteater, the northern tamandua. These little dogs, they're not chihuahuas. They are, let's see, the Xolo, I believe they're called. I'm not going to try to pronounce that, to be honest, but they're little hairless dogs. They're really cute. And a beautiful sea turtle as well. We've got a really gorgeous lizard. It's a collared lizard. And this guy's got some bats over here. Here we can see a quetzal, very notable bird in Mexico and Central America, particularly for its long tail feathers. They are very prized by the Aztecs. And monarch butterflies come to Mexico to mate. They have a huge migration coming down across North America, and they settle in this one spot in Mexico. It's really beautiful. Let's see, this would be, this is at Uxmal, which is actually on my map over here. It's right here, pretty close to Chichen Itza. But it's another fantastic Mayan pyramid. Hold on. Indigenous Cultures map. You can see the Olmec heartland was right about here. Let me use pencil. That's a little bit more tingly in my opinion. The Olmecs were centered right about here. The Mayas were more in the green areas. The Toltec, which I didn't really mention, were all up in here. And then the Aztec Empire, little pockets you can see in the orange there. And then there's, of course, present-day Mexico. Here's one of the Olmec heads. Really huge, too. My goodness. And this is, it looks like a little brooch or charm the Aztecs made of a double-headed serpent. It's a big old teeth. Here's Hernan Cortez. Boo. And this is him attacking Tenochtitlan. And what was interesting about it, like I said, you know how the Aztecs were made, little islands on the water. The whole city was built on water. You can see some of the islands there. So technically Mexico City is built on top of a big lake in the water. So the city's very slowly sinking, to be honest. Here's a map of New Spain. You can see where it started there in the pink, And as it expanded by 1819, it had reached all the way up there. And here is Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla, who led the call for independence. And here you can see some notable battles in the Mexican-American War all throughout there. And this is a statue commemorating some very, very young soldiers who stood their ground like young teenagers against the Americans. This is Benito Juarez, I mentioned. And this is a photograph, it says, of some poor Mexican workers. Up here we can see Pancho Villa. He was one of the big freedom fighters of the Mexican Revolution. Some beautiful artwork here in the National Palace that the Spaniards built when it was a colony. Now it's at the I think it's just government offices and stuff like that, and lots of beautiful artwork like that. And these are some Zapatista rebels, the 1990s, fighting for the rights of indigenous people. And some demonstrators. Oh, this is something I didn't want to mention, where 43 college students just disappeared one day, and it seems like the government had a lot of cover-up in what happened to them, so these people are protesting, demanding to know where they were. Really sad little events. Like I said, like little events throughout Mexico's more recent history since like the 1970s, 1980s. But nothing as huge as like the revolution or the wars and things like that. Nothing on that grand of a scale. This is the National Palace from the outside. Oh, it says an Aztec palace once stood there. Didn't know that. This lady's casting her vote. And we have the Chamber of Deputies over here. And here's a map of Mexico City down here. And we can see some of the big modern skyscrapers and some of the more traditional Spanish buildings. It says this is the Paseo de la Reforma. And does it say what this building is? It's very beautiful. But anyway, we have the Supreme Court here. And here we have the flag of Mexico. Let's read about it. The flag of Mexico features 3 vertical bands, one green, one white, and one red. The green represents hope, white stands for purity, and red for the color of the blood of those who fought for Mexico's independence from Spain in the early 19th century. In the middle of the flag's white band is a picture of a golden eagle perched on a cactus. The eagle is devouring a rattlesnake in its beak. The image is inspired by an Aztec legend. The Aztecs were once wandering in search of the perfect place to build a settlement. Their god told them to look for an eagle eating a snake while resting on a cactus. The Aztecs finally spied the eagle at the site of what is now Mexico City. There they built the great city of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. And this is a PRI rally. You can see protesting against, I believe he was president at the time this book came out, Enrique Peña Nieto. They obviously don't like him, and that's a really neat picture of him carrying the flag. So this guy is chopping down these agave plants so he can make tequila. And this guy's looks like part of the oil storage over here. And here are some fishermen out on a lake using really big nets. Here's a resources map. You can see many different resources coming out of Mexico. Way too many to mention, to be honest. And this lady is making jet airplane parts. This guy's growing some tulips. Oh, in Washington State, talking about how there's many different Mexican laborers all throughout the United States. This lady is selling some vegetables outside in the market. And here are some pesos Mexican currency. A bustling, bustling day in Mexico City. And look at this. This is in Chiapas. It's a Mayan girl wearing some very beautifully painted fabrics. And here are some Afro-Mexicans that I mentioned. People who are descended from African slaves and Native Mexicans. The population map, you can really see how dense it is right here as opposed to other parts of Mexico. Oh, that's sweet. She's got her schoolwork ready to go. Here is a sign at Oaxaca, and it's saying that the sign talking about the place here is in Spanish, Zapotec, and English. Look at this Guadalajara Cathedral. That's a really beautiful church. I love this dome. That's gorgeous. And this is Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is a very important figure in Mexican Catholicism. She has a whole holiday in December. And this guy's got a really big rosary to pray with. Here's a little baptism. That's a cute baby. Sor Juana was a very famous playwright and poetry writer, and very famous nun. Some pilgrims for the Virgin of Guadalupe, or Our Lady of Guadalupe. And here are some dancers for a festival, Par Chicos. Really beautiful masks there. And this is obviously for Palm Sunday. You can see the palm fronds there. And this guy's having a good worship time at church. And here is a traditional healer doing his own thing. And look at this, a Mayan ball player. Really precarious sport. And of course, very famously, sometimes the losers got sacrificed. Some excavations here at Templo Mayor. And some very famous art here painted by Jose Clemente Orozco. And of course, Frida Kahlo is probably the most famous Mexican painter. Definitely one of the most famous female painters of all time. And look at this. This is an alebrije. It says very, very colorful and bright. Some mariachi performers here. And some fantastic dancers. Octavio Paz, very famous writer. He's playing some basketball on a very misty morning. And here is Julio Cesar Chavez, very, very famous boxer. And here is a cowboy at the rodeo. Of course, another iconic image from Mexico, including the lucha libre wrestlers. And here's some wonderful faces. It says they're going to an art exhibit. A Mayan woman outside of her home. And here's some wonderful little faces on a bicycle. And here's a very wonderful grandmother. It says meeting her grandson. How cute. And this talks about the quinceañera, which is a tradition. When a girl turns 15, she has a big party, wearing a big dress, and lots of other traditions. He's hitting a piñata full of candy inside. This lady's making some delicious tortillas. And here's some agua fresca, which is pretty much just like fruit and water mixed together. A little bit of sugar to make it sweet. Now, is this the most Mexican picture you've ever seen? Very traditional cowboy holding the Mexican flag on his horse. My goodness, this big old mustache there. That's a great photograph. And that's the end of the book. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And like I said, I'm going to have a couple more videos about Mexico coming out this week. You don't want to miss one of them. It's a Choose Your Own Adventure, Aztec Adventure. I haven't even opened it yet because I'm going to have a genuine Choose Your Own Adventure on camera. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you again. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good